Welcome to Dark Night Towers. Before we step into tonight's chilling true story, in the shadowed records of the 18th century Plantation South, whispers spoke of a man whose real name was never written down. Only his title survived, the Black Widower. He was not born into legend. He became one through silence, patience, and calculated restraint. Enslaved people spoke of him in hushed tones after nightfall, while plantation elites dismissed him as a rumor too unsettling to confront. What made him different was not brute force or open rebellion, but his mind. He understood the psychology of power, the loneliness hidden behind silk dresses and grand verandas, and the fragile egos of men who believed themselves invincible. Wherever he went, misfortune followed powerful households, marriages collapsed, and influence rotted from within. By the time authorities noticed a pattern, the man had already vanished, leaving behind 13 ruined estates and a legend that history tried, unsuccessfully, to erase. To understand how the Black Widower operated, one must first understand the world that created him, a plantation society built on terror disguised as order. These estates were kingdoms of cruelty, where a single white master's word decided life, punishment, or death. Fear was not just a tool. It was the foundation of control. Overseers enforced obedience with whips and public humiliation, ensuring that even silence felt dangerous. Enslaved people learned to lower their eyes, measure every step, and speak only when spoken to, because survival depended on invisibility. Yet this fear-based system had a weakness. The masters ruled outwardly, but inside their grand homes, paranoia and insecurity thrived. Trust was rare, love was transactional, and marriages were often arranged for wealth and status rather than affection. Behind locked doors and heavy curtains, plantation wives lived isolated lives, surrounded by luxury but starved of agency, intimacy, and genuine connection. It was within this pressure-filled world, where dominance masked decay, that the Black Widower found his opening. He didn't fight the system head-on, he slipped through its cracks, using its own cruelty, secrecy, and emotional neglect as weapons against it. Plantation wives occupied a strange and dangerous position, elevated above everyone on the estate, yet imprisoned by the very power that protected them. Society told them they were beyond reproach, shielded by wealth, race, and marriage to influential men. No accusation against them was ever meant to be questioned, and no scandal was supposed to reach beyond the gates of the plantation. This illusion of invulnerability bred carelessness. They believed their status made them invisible to consequences, immune to manipulation, and forever in control of their private worlds. But beneath the surface, many of these women lived in emotional isolation. Their husbands were often absent, cruel, or consumed by dominance and reputation. Conversation was formal, affection rare, and vulnerability discouraged. The wives learned to perform perfection in public, while quietly suffocating in private. They controlled households, punished the enslaved, and upheld the system. Yet they themselves were trapped within rigid expectations. The Black Widower understood this contradiction perfectly. He saw that what made these women feel untouchable also made them predictable. Their confidence blinded them, their loneliness softened them, and their belief in absolute safety made them lower their guard, just enough for him to step inside their lives without ever appearing dangerous. The Black Widower never arrived like a threat. He appeared like a shadow that belonged there. Sometimes he came as a helper accompanying a trader, sometimes as a man hired briefly for specialized work, and sometimes simply as a stranger passing through plantation roads no one bothered to question. He kept his head low, his voice calm, and his presence deliberately unremarkable. In a world where enslaved men were expected to be loud in labor and silent in thought, his composure felt disarming rather than suspicious. What set him apart was his restraint. He listened more than he spoke. He never stared too long, never rushed a conversation, never challenged authority outright. Plantation wives noticed him not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't. In quiet moments on verandas or in passing exchanges, his words carried empathy rather than fear, curiosity rather than submission. He spoke as if he understood loss, absence, and longing without ever naming them directly. This subtlety made him memorable. By the time anyone wondered who he truly was or where he had come from, the widower was already woven into the emotional fabric of the household, trusted not through force, but through the illusion of gentleness. The Black Widower understood that on plantations, attention was dangerous, especially for a black man. So he made himself useful, reliable, and forgettable in all the ways that mattered to those in power. He followed rules precisely, completed tasks without complaint, and never lingered where he wasn't expected. Overseers saw him as efficient. Masters saw him as obedient. And because he never challenged authority, no one thought to question his presence. But trust didn't grow upward, it grew sideways. With plantation wives, he earned confidence through emotional precision. He remembered small details others ignored: a favorite flower, a passing remark, a tone of sadness hidden beneath polite conversation. He never flattered openly or crossed boundaries too quickly. Instead, he positioned himself as safe, someone who would listen without judgment and speak without gossip. In a society obsessed with reputation, that silence was powerful. Most importantly, he never asked for trust outright. He let it accumulate naturally through consistency and calm. Each harmless interaction made the next one easier. Each shared moment felt accidental rather than planned. By the time suspicion could have formed, it felt too late, because the widower no longer felt like a stranger. He felt familiar. And on the plantations, familiarity was often mistaken for loyalty. The Black Widower never seduced impulsively. Every move followed a quiet, repeatable pattern. He always began by observing from a distance, learning the rhythms of a household before ever stepping closer. He noted when a plantation wife was most alone, which rooms she favored, and how her mood shifted depending on her husband's presence or absence. These details told him more than words ever could. Seduction, for him, was not about desire, it was about timing. The first emotional connection was never romantic. It was built through shared silence, brief conversations layered with understanding, and moments where he mirrored unspoken feelings back to them. He spoke of loss without names, of loneliness without blame, allowing the women to project their own frustrations onto him. This made the bond feel self-created rather than influenced. They believed the connection was their idea. Only after emotional dependence formed did intimacy follow, and even then, it felt inevitable rather than forced. Each woman believed her situation was unique, unaware that the same careful steps had been used before. The brilliance of the widower's method was its invisibility. There was no sudden scandal, no dramatic beginning, just a slow crossing of lines that felt natural, personal, and impossible to reverse. By the time the first seduction was complete, the pattern was already perfected, ready to be repeated again and again. Despite living in close proximity, the plantation wives existed in quiet competition rather than solidarity. Their social world was built on appearances, jealousy, and rigid hierarchies, where vulnerability was treated as weakness and confession as social suicide. To admit emotional involvement, especially with a man society deemed forbidden, would mean risking reputation, marriage, and survival. Silence became protection. The black widower relied on this isolation. Each woman believed her connection to him was secret, rare, and deeply personal. He never hinted that others existed, and the women themselves never imagined they were not alone. Shame played a powerful role. Even suspicion felt too dangerous to voice aloud. It was safer to believe the lie than to confront the truth. There was also fear that speaking would expose them to their husband's wrath, legal punishment, or public disgrace. The system that gave them privilege also trapped them. In that silence, the widower remained invisible, moving from estate to estate without resistance. By the time patterns emerged, there was no network of truth, only isolated secrets, buried too deep to ever be shared. One by one, the black widower's influence spread across plantations like an unseen contagion. These were not weak households or failing unions. They were among the most powerful marriages in the region, alliances built on land, bloodlines, and reputation. Yet each followed the same quiet trajectory: distance between husband and wife, unexplained arguments, sudden changes in behavior, and a growing tension no one could name. From the outside, everything appeared intact. Inside, the foundations were cracking. The widower never rushed his departure from one estate to the next. He left behind emotional fractures that continued to widen long after he was gone. Plantation masters sensed loss of control, but misread its source, blaming rivals, finances, or disobedient laborers. Wives grew guarded, secretive, and distracted, protecting a truth that slowly poisoned their marriages. None of them knew they were part of a larger pattern, 13 separate lives connected by the same unseen hand. What made this web so devastating was its reach. These marriages governed entire counties, controlled courts, trade routes, and enforcement. When they weakened, the system weakened with them. The black widower had not just entered private lives, he had quietly destabilized a network of power, proving that even the most fortified institutions could be undone without violence. One household at a time. What made the black widower truly terrifying was not his charm or cunning. It was the purpose behind his actions, a motive so precise and calculated that no one could recognize it until it was complete. To outsiders, his relationships with the plantation wives seemed scandalous but meaningless, a series of coincidences or indulgences. But beneath the surface, every seduction, every carefully timed conversation, and every secretive gesture served a single goal: revenge against a system built on cruelty, exploitation, and absolute power. The plantations were microcosms of oppression, where human lives were commodities and the wealthy ruled through fear. The widower, a man shaped by these injustices, understood that direct confrontation was impossible. He could not overthrow the masters openly, nor could he dismantle their estates with violence. They had too many guards, laws, and allies. So he targeted the most vulnerable point in their world, their hearts, their trust, and their marriages. By destabilizing the private lives of these powerful men, he struck where they felt untouchable. The masters believed they controlled everything, yet the widower proved they could be undone without lifting a hand against them. Each ruined marriage was a statement, each secret affair a calculated blow to pride, and each escape from suspicion a reminder that true power can exist quietly, patiently, and invisibly. His revenge was not public, it was psychological, intimate, and irreversible, leaving a mark that would echo through families and history alike. The Black Widower's genius lay not just in charm, but in manipulating perception, turning small gestures into monumental influence. One of his most effective tools was the use of letters and messages, seemingly innocent but loaded with calculated meaning. He wrote notes that mirrored the wives' unspoken thoughts, addressed their fears, or hinted at shared secrets, making them feel understood and extraordinary. Each word was deliberate, each phrase designed to deepen emotional reliance while maintaining plausible deniability. But alongside these tokens of intimacy came subtle deception. He planted ideas, half-truths, and insinuations that guided the women's perceptions without them realizing it. A passing comment about a husband's inattention, a rumor subtly reinforced, or an observation phrased as advice, everything was crafted to shape their thoughts and feelings. The women believed the widower's insights were spontaneous, personal, and uniquely for them. Even more disturbingly, he occasionally revealed carefully curated truths, real details of the world outside their plantation walls, to lend credibility to his lies. This balance of fact and fiction made his manipulation nearly impossible to detect. What seemed like affection was often strategy. What seemed like counsel was often control. Through letters, words, and subtle truths, the Black Widower orchestrated an emotional symphony that ensnared 13 wives, turning trust into a weapon and affection into an invisible chain. For the Black Widower, seduction was never an end. It was the doorway to strategy. At first, the women believed the connection was purely emotional, perhaps even romantic. He appeared as a confidant, a gentle presence in lives governed by isolation and control. The initial moments were subtle, shared glances on the veranda, quiet conversations in hallways, and listening more than speaking. But behind every smile and sympathetic word, he was studying, timing, and planning. The turning point came when the emotional dependency was established. At this stage, the women began to trust him completely, revealing private thoughts, frustrations, and secrets about their households. This was when seduction shifted into a calculated strategy of influence. He carefully guided their perceptions of their husbands, their marriages, and even the other women on the plantations, planting doubts and insecurities that would grow into fractures. Every action from this moment was tactical. He chose what to reveal, what to withhold, and when to retreat, all to maximize the effect on the household. The women believed they were acting of their own volition, making choices in secret, while in reality, he was shaping the course of events with precision. What began as charm had now transformed into psychological warfare, executed silently, invisibly, and with devastating efficiency. By the time the masters realized something was wrong, it was too late. The Black Widower had turned intimacy into strategy, affection into manipulation, and desire into a weapon that no amount of wealth, power, or authority could counter. The Black Widower's revenge was terrifying precisely because it required no violence. Unlike the physical rebellions or uprisings that plantation masters feared, his method was invisible, intimate, and psychological. By carefully ensnaring the wives and undermining trust within households, he dismantled the power of men who believed themselves untouchable, all without lifting a hand against them. Each seduction, each secret letter, and each carefully planted doubt worked like a slow, acting poison. Marriages began to fracture quietly, husbands sensed distance, but could not pinpoint its cause. Rumors spread, alliances weakened, and paranoia took root. The master's authority eroded from within, their control over both family and estates slipping like sand through fingers. On the surface, everything appeared normal. No blood was spilled, no laws were broken openly, and yet the devastation was total. The genius of his revenge lay in invisibility. No outsider could see the damage, and no witness could connect the emotional unraveling to him. Each household became a silent theater of ruin, with the men trapped in their own pride, unable to act without exposing themselves to scandal. By the time the truth, or at least the pattern, was understood, the Black Widower had already vanished. His revenge was complete, a psychological collapse, so thorough that wealth, status, and dominance offered no protection. He had proven that sometimes the deadliest weapon is not a sword, but the mind and the manipulation of trust. The ultimate impact of the Black Widower's actions was the slow, internal unraveling of the plantation masters themselves. These were men accustomed to command, feared for their authority, and believed untouchable by any force. Yet the widower didn't confront them directly. He exploited their blind spots, the fragile egos, the secret insecurities, and the private fractures in their homes. As the wives became emotionally entangled with him, small cracks appeared in the household, whispered arguments, unexplained absences, and subtle shifts in affection. Masters grew suspicious, but could not act without risking scandal. They questioned their own judgment, mistrusted loyal staff, and struggled to maintain control over their estates. The very systems of power they relied upon, obedience, hierarchy, and reputation, began to crumble silently around them. Meanwhile, the Black Widower ensured he remained unseen, leaving no evidence, no confrontation, and no clear explanation for the chaos. The destruction was intimate, personal, and absolute. Families disintegrated, alliances within communities fractured, and the social dominance of these men diminished without a single duel, fight, or arrest. The widower had proven a chilling truth, men, that even the strongest men, commanding wealth and fear, could be brought down from within by exploiting what they valued most, their wives' trust, their own pride, and the illusion of invincibility. The horror was psychological. Power could not shield them, authority could not protect them, and the very homes they ruled became instruments of their undoing. After weaving his intricate web through 13 households, the Black Widower vanished as quietly and mysteriously as he had appeared. There was no dramatic exit, no final confrontation, no trail of evidence, only the lingering echoes of his presence in the fractured homes he left behind. Plantation masters were left bewildered. Wives were left with forbidden memories and emotional scars, and the community was left speculating about the man who seemed to slip through their fingers like smoke. His disappearance was deliberate. By leaving without warning, he ensured that suspicion could never be concentrated and that the psychological damage he had inflicted would continue to grow unchecked. The wives were left questioning their own choices and loyalty, while the masters could neither punish nor understand him. The absence became a weapon itself, a void filled with fear, regret, and unanswered questions. Rumors circulated. Some said he had fled to another county. Others believed he had returned to the shadows of society, and some whispered he may have been planning his next campaign. Yet no trace was ever found, no records of his movements survived, and his true identity remained a mystery. The Black Widower's disappearance was as strategic as his seductions, proof that the most dangerous forces often operate not through confrontation, but by leaving an indelible void in the lives they touch. By leaving without a trace, he immortalized himself in legend, a man who could manipulate the powerful, ruin the untouchable, and vanish, leaving history with a story too chilling to forget. The tale of the Black Widower was never meant to survive in history books. It challenged the foundations of power, exposed the fragility of elite households, and revealed a truth too unsettling for the societies that recorded events. Plantation masters prided themselves on control, dominance, and authority, acknowledging that a single man, unarmed, invisible, and operating through intellect and subtlety, could dismantle 13 powerful households would have been embarrassing and threatening. Historians, often reliant on the accounts of the wealthy, either ignored the story, dismissed it as rumor, or sanitized it to protect reputations. The wives' perspectives were lost or suppressed, and the Black Widower's existence was minimized to a whisper in letters, court records, or second-hand testimonies. Any documentation that survived was fragmented, coded, or intentionally obscured, leaving the story to circulate only in folklore, secret family stories, and hushed conversations among enslaved communities who had witnessed the indirect effects of his work. Moreover, his methods, psychological manipulation, seduction, and social disruption, did not fit the traditional narrative of heroism or villainy. He was too clever to be labeled a criminal in conventional terms, and too destructive to be dismissed as innocent. His genius threatened the very social order that recorded history, so the archives tried to erase him. Yet, like a shadow, his story survived in fragments, waiting for those willing to dig, piece together clues, and confront the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most terrifying acts of power are invisible, silent, and nearly impossible to punish. The Black Widower's legend endures because truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of resurfacing, and his story remains one of the darkest, most cunning acts of revenge in history.